I'd like to welcome Jason Benetti, TV voice of the Detroit Tigers, to the Days of Roar podcast for the second time. Jason, we had you on the show last spring training, so it's only right we do it again. Jason is now back for his second season as the play-by-play broadcaster for the Tigers, and he's fresh off winning the Michigan Sportscaster of the Year award. Jason Benetti, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. This is my second time on a Tigers podcast.
Let's go. That's a good thing. Thank you for coming back. But hey, we mentioned the award. Can we just start right there? Like Jason Benetti, 2024 Michigan Sportscaster of the Year, as awarded by the National Sports Media Association. You've won many awards, but to do so in your first year in Michigan, like, does that mean something special to you? And what's that like now to be an award winner in Michigan?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it is an everybody award, right? Because they don't give out like color analyst of the year. That just doesn't exist yet. It's just like sportscaster, and it tends to lean toward play-by-play. So, and it's a Tigers award as well, because, I doubt that happens if the Tigers don't get hot at the end of the season and people are throwing tomatoes at their television. But it takes a village in this way. And it's, you guys were telling me off the top, you had Andy on last week, and it's for all the analysts and all the reporters and for everybody. And I am honored that people enjoyed what they watched last year, because I think the most tenuous moment is in your first time with a new audience. Like I do all these like speaking engagements about first impressions based on how I walk and how easy, life becomes when you realize first impressions aren't the only thing. Well, like that doesn't make it any less nerve-wracking when people are having a first impression of you as a new audience. And so, to have it go well enough to even be considered for something like that is a bit of a load off for me, because while I know and believe that I am a play-by-play announcer at heart, the audience has to like it. I mean, that's the way for any television show. That's like you can have a great run on a TV drama, and then you can throw out an episode that people pan so much that they kind of turn on your show. Sorry, Severance. I don't know if we're watching, but season 2, episode 8 just came out, and I'm in one of those I don't know where we're going sort of situations. So I'm judgmental as well, evidently. But no, it's thank you for saying that, and it was an honor, and it remains an honor with all of the great sportscasters that are in a city that really does care about its sportscasting in like a very detailed way. Like, you miss something, people are going to notice in Detroit. And I don't know that that's that way everywhere.
So, first of all, when you talk about TV shows that kind of have to hold up to the original, I want to go with, I'm not too happy with the new Suits LA. I just want to go on record as saying that's not as good as the original Suits. JB, how do you reflect on your first year in Detroit with the Tigers? And were you surprised by the immediate bond and love affair you created with the fans? Because holy smokes, people love you and love listening to you, and kind of discuss that a little bit.
Yeah, I as I was talking about a moment ago, like I feel like Detroit really cares about its sports announcing, and all I've ever wanted was to be involved in that craft of sportscasting and have people care about the details. And that's how I grew up through Syracuse and its radio station and all of that. And so to go to a place where the audience has an elevated sense of here's what we want out of a sports announcer, and it can't just be, what we expect a sports announcer to be. Like, you can't be 50th percentile, or else people are just going to be like, yeah, we've had Ernie, sorry. We've had Ken and Mick, sorry. We've had, and insert anybody there. So, I it pushes me to be in a place that cares about my job, our craft, the whole thing like that. And to watch what the Tigers did at the end of that season, and to be sitting there with a headset on and saying, okay, what amazing thing is going to happen now? How are they going to get out of trouble? And I know we've talked about TV shows already, but when it felt a little bit like when the title hero of the show gets in trouble at the 15-minute mark, he's not or she's not going to meet their end, right? Like, it's not going to be over for Superman after the first act break. And that's how I felt about the Tigers last year. Is like, oh, they're down 3-1, but the writers aren't going to let them, like they're not going to die here. Like, that's not going to happen. And it turns out those Scooble starts against the Rockies and Athletics were very much just plot points, right? Like, they lose those two games and you're like, oh my goodness, I guess I was wrong. They are going to kill Walter White in the first season. And they didn't. That's not how it happened. So for me, it was such a joy watching that. But I promise you, I got into that mode where it was like, how are the Tigers going to get out of this today? And that feels bulletproof as a narrator. And when you have it in your mind that it's like, and because they've given you every piece of evidence that they are that quote unquote team of destiny, it is unbelievably fun to document, because it is this idea that they are just like every day lifting the bus off the person. And it was superhuman and nobody saw it coming. I didn't see it coming. Like, I did an event with the Tigers about a month and a half ago and said to the audience, it was at the Motor City Casino, like a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 people, like, how many of you thought the Tigers were going to make the playoffs at the beginning of September? And all the hands got raised. And I was like, liars, lies, all lies, didn't happen. Because but it's one of those, if you ask anybody who was at Game 7 of a World Series and you counted all the hands that got raised, it ends up being like 300,000 people. Well, that's a fire hazard. So it was just such a joy to watch an underdog of underdogs do this, because, as somebody who grew up loving the 13 seed winning in the NCAA tournament, this was that, but for a month.
Just for the record, I did book my honeymoon, so I would not be raising my hand in that situation.
How was it, by the way? Was it everything you wanted?
Oh my gosh. Greece was beautiful. It was, everything that we could have ever imagined, everything that we hoped for. But man, oh man, it's funny how some things work out, isn't it?
It really, really is.
So my personal favorite call from Jason Benetti in 2024, quote, "A city that doesn't care about the odds has a baseball team to match," end quote. It was September 26th after a 4-3 win over the Rays at Comerica Park, putting the Tigers on the doorstep of clinching a spot in the postseason. Let me play the audio here.
2-2. Tigers win again! A city that doesn't care about the odds has a baseball team to match.
Jason, I get the chills. Can you take us back to that call? Like, where does something like that come from?
First of all, the first thing that hits me that I love so much about play-by-play, and you could have played 100 announcers who I revere call, and I would say the same thing, is that I just defy you to find anywhere else in sports, any other job that doesn't involve player, that just allows such emotion to bubble up while a game is happening. Like, I'm sitting here in my office right now, and if I try to get to that level of energy on my own, it sounds superficial or artificial. But when you're in that moment and you're surrounded by 30,000 people and you have a partner next to you, couple partners and this whole crew, and you're just elevating each other and you're doing it for each other. And it's kind of a team bonding piece. It is something special to get that out of a human. And you know, like, you listen to the Do You Believe in Miracles, Al Michaels call, and all of these like seminal calls. And the thing that strikes me is like, you just can't get there on your own. And so the team gets us to this place. And then, you know, with that came out of my mouth, yeah, I think it's why I identify with Detroit broadly, is like, people have this opinion of the city, and it's a really broad opinion, and it's not ever really true. You know, like, as I said, like, as somebody who has rooted for underdogs, gee, wonder why, like, in the NCAA tournament, like, it makes a lot of sense to me to celebrate, especially in a world that feels like the big people are getting bigger and individual decisions are getting smaller and smaller, and it's tougher to push the boulder. And like, there are so many people who I definitely think about as we're doing these games who like just want to come home and watch a baseball game, because it's the one place during the summer after work that like something can be fun and easy. And like, if we're that, and we can kind of be the same as the people who are at home in their sense of like, man, I just work 10 hours, and for what? Sometimes, you know, I think that happens across the globe, is I just work 10 hours, I work my face off, and for what? And the answer is like, for your family, for your future. And we know all that, but when we're in the middle of it and people are taking shots at us or whatever it is, like, you just want to let it out. And I think for this city that gets so often underestimated, but if you talk about it with people, all they want to talk about is the growth. I feel like I run into complete strangers in Detroit, and like, we're downtown, and one of the first things an Uber driver or a cab driver from the airport wants to talk about is like, all that, like, if they don't have any idea who I am, what I do, we get into these conversations, and like, all they want to do is point out this new building, that new building, this used to be something else. Like, that is, to me, in some ways, the ethos of this city. And so I adore that. I think it's one of the best traits to have, is to just keep going no matter what. And I feel like this team did that. Again, I have a pretty good radar for like underdogs that I should care about. I was one, and I missed this one. I had no idea it was coming. And so there's emotion in that too for me. And so that's where all that comes from. I appreciate you enjoying it. And I really do think that team and this city were made for each other.
I love hearing that. Last question on the broadcast. What are your expectations for things in 2025? You're going to be working a lot with Andy Dirks, Dan Petrie, Daniela Bruce coming into the fold. What are some of your thoughts on the TV broadcast and the 2025 season for the Tigers?
Well, let me start with this. I was on here last year. How do you think the gauge of what I told you all might be coming actually was? Was I honest about that? And did we hit that range? Like, I'm not asking for like certification. I just am interested in your perspective. Like, was it rangy enough? Do you feel like it was? Was there enough range?
100%.
Then I would say like, the fun of this is figuring it out as an us, you know, and when there's a new us, you know, like Andy and I have done some games together, but not 1,000. And Daniela and I have done some games together, but not 1,000. And Peaches and I have done some games together. And while it's more, it's not 1,000. And so, I hope you don't take my question as like, did we do it? Did we do it right? Didn't I tell you? That's not what I mean. That's not what I mean at all. I am really, as an individual, committed to range. And I think as a group, we are too. And I am very glad that the Tigers got hot late, because I do think if you cut out late August and early September and the rest of September, people might say that it was like too zany, or we didn't hit like enough big moments, or whatever it might be. But we had the opportunity late in the season to show as a group that we can nail those big moments, that it's not all fun and games, that it is like when there's a serious moment, we are absolutely going to do it. But I can say that until I'm, hoodie blue in the face. But like, if we don't get to put it on tape, nobody gets to hear it. So I asked that question in part because I feel like we got fortunate at the end of the year that we had moments to show that when it's serious time, it really is serious time, and we are going to do total justice to that. It's just that when it's 9-1, we're probably going to hit each other with baseball bats. Like that's just, that's going to happen.
But Jason, I think the most fun part for all of us listening to a broadcaster who has one of the most unique styles in baseball, which is, extremely fluent in all the nuance of the game, the data of the game, but at the same time has an uncanny ability to mix comedy and pop culture, and they make it all together. And it's like going to the best baseball restaurant while you listen to the game that you could possibly go to. It's amazing. So, yes, maybe did it take a month for us to kind of understand the greatness of the meal? But, whether it's 9-1 or whether it's a come from behind 3-2 win, scoring 2 in the 8th, it doesn't matter, because the meal and the journey of the meal is always so different and so fun. So, when you ask, did you accomplish what you promised? The answer is hell yes, you did.
Well, I don't know that I've ever heard a better comparison for what we do. So like if I steal that on future podcasts, I will definitely cite you, Mark. But I have never learned to be a good cook, but I love Chopped and I love The Bear. And I love the idea that you can make such magic with food. And you're so right. I'm kind of floored, because it's one of those like, oh man, I look at food all the time and I never thought of that. It's a great comparison for what we do. And I really appreciate you guys saying that. I do. And we will work very, very hard every year to make sure that we are doing right by the audience in every moment. But that was a hell of a ride. I mean, it was a hell of a drug. It was like, there were nights after the game where I was like, I know I have to go to sleep, because I'm going to be a fiasco tomorrow for that 1:00, and I'm not going to sleep. There's no amount of melatonin that could put you to sleep after some of those Tigers wins.
All right, Jason, we've talked for 20 minutes. We have yet to talk baseball, which is the essence of Jason Benetti, by the way. But let's talk about the Tigers in 2025. You got some expectations. You are traveling the country so much doing basketball. You can't sit there every day and watch every spring game, but I know, knowing you know exactly what's been going on down here. So what's your thoughts on the 2025 Tigers? Where do you think this is going? And, how is it different than last year? And there's a lot of expectations now.
There are from fans. I think from the team too. I think they expect more of themselves. And I think that's usually a really good thing. I am fascinated. One of the things I'm really fascinated by this year is how you make sure, and there have already, the stories about Kerry Carpenter trying to get better against lefties, and stories of quote unquote platoon people skill sets, right? Not platoon people, but platoon skill sets, people trying to improve those skill sets. right? Where is the push and pull? And when do these players cross that threshold? Or do they, or don't they? Or is it always more valuable? And it very, very well could be. I'm not saying like it's a race for Kerry Carpenter to hit lefties, because I do think when you have righties who are really great against lefties, that is a tall threshold. Like trying to get me to be on the 400-meter team is like not a great idea. Right. So like, I'm not saying Kerry is that against left-handers. I would never pin that on anybody. But what I'm saying is like, you want people who are great at the thing they're doing. And selflessness was the story of the season last year for the Tigers. But as players grow, they want to grow their skill sets. So how much do they push in terms of growth, right? The Tigers are truly, and we can see it in the farm system ranking coming out, the other day, a couple days ago, like number 1 farm system. We see Jack Flaherty coming back. I think there's enough of a critical mass of evidence of like, people want to be with the Tigers because the Tigers are about growing skill sets. That is happening in front of our eyes. And it's a great thing to have in Major League Baseball in 2025. How do those skill sets grow? How do they push the manager? Or do they even push the manager? Because again, like if you have Andy Ibanez or Kerry Carpenter and there's a lefty, it's nothing against Kerry. It's nothing against Kerry in 7 years. Andy Ibanez is a torturer of left-handed pitching. That's what he's here for. And so I think that push and pull to watch over the course of the season, and, the amount of self-belief that carries over from last year into this year, those are two really intriguing things. I also I think Jackson Jobe is so fascinating. He comes in the playoffs, the stuff clearly plays, but he's not as self-actualized. He's not as himself as we're going to see in a couple years down the road. So how close do we get to that this year? What do all these outfield injuries do to leverage the opening day roster? Who's going to play the outfield on opening day? How does the pitching shake out, with a lot of starters? How do you take the lessons of necessity from last year into this year when you don't have that same necessity in your starting rotation? How do you play that? How do you utilize it? I do think the Tigers were just so equipped strategically and got the feedback from the game that all this stuff worked, that I feel like there's a superhuman version of this where AJ can somehow even play more on the margins than he did last year, which to me is like a stupendously terrifying thought.
Well, take us inside AJ Hinch a little bit, because even when you mention Kerry Carpenter against left-handed pitching and you think about Andy Ibanez coming off the bench or Justin Henry Malloy coming off the bench, if you need a really big swing, those are two guys that thrive against lefties, whereas Kerry not so much. But is there anyone better to navigate that than AJ Hinch when you consider the way that he worked his magic with pitching chaos, bullpen matchups, pinch hitters? It was day in and day out last season. And then on top of that, he set the culture, and that's real.
It is very real. I was talking to a staff member from a Big Ten school in the last month, and we were just kind of broadly talking about baseball. And he said, he goes, yeah, I don't think managers, I don't think they're worth that many wins. I was like, I didn't think so either until I watched the Tigers last year. And I said to him specifically, though, we were talking about the Reds hiring Terry Francona is how it came up. And I think the world of Tito, and I do think he's worth wins. Absolutely. But I said to this guy, and I think this is a specific distinction that matters. I don't think managers who are going to play at all by the book add that many wins. I think managers who shatter the paradigm and are willing to color because of either their self-belief, their lockstep with the front office, or a combination thereof, and they're kind of playing with house money because they've had success before. I think when managers decide to change the paradigm and do things that are so infinitesimally small, but so impactful because they just change the way you think about the game, I think that's why you end up with AJ Hinch so extremely impacting this team, because he is very willing. I mean, he knows the rule book so unbelievably well. And he's very willing to say, yeah, I think this is better because this, and this. Like, he's enumerated all of the trade-offs and he calculates that in his mind. And it's in part because he was very open with us on the podcast, and he's talked to other people about it. Like, it didn't work in Arizona. Then it did in Houston, and he's learned so many lessons, and he's learned so many different specific ways to manipulate a bullpen or another manager or whatever it is. I just think his combination of experience and intelligence allows him to take a sledgehammer to the paradigm, which allows him then to add value to the manager's chair, which is what exactly an owner wants when he hires a manager. He just doesn't know it and sometimes doesn't incentivize it. The Tigers have a situation where there's nobody pushing back against that because everybody wants it. I think AJ, in part, has been just fully deployed as the weapon that he is because of his own experience, but also because he's surrounded by people who want it and encourage it. There's nobody saying like, but he's kind of crazy for doing that. You know, if the guy who coached Grinnell for a long time in college basketball, who was putting up like 120 points a game, if his assistant coach and his AD were like, yeah, but what if we played pack line defense? Like, then suddenly you're not running it nearly as effectively because it's half measures.
But Jason, it's not just the baseball strategy that Hinch employs like a master. It's the people strategy. It's how he knows by August or September, because in April and May, he's given guys rope to see what they can do in certain situations. And he's tried to find out who's rising to the occasion, who maybe that matchup wouldn't be good for going forward. He just always gives guys an opportunity to prove to him they belong in certain situations, and then deploys that as the year goes on. And last year was a perfect example of those things. It's not just the baseball, it's the people management.
Yeah, he gets the player buy-in, and that's the difference. A lot of managers around the league, they wonder, how does he get his players to buy in the way that he does? Because that's not an easy thing to do, to get a room of guys, and not just the room that's in Detroit, but also the guys that are in Toledo coming up too, to get everyone to buy in and to be on the same page. That's masterful.
And I think part of the mastery, guys, is that's why you use somebody like Andy Ibanez for specific situations. The last thing any one of us wants is to go to work and feel like we're a drone, right? Go to work, you churn out the work. Anybody with ambition who wants to grow in their job, right? Like, some people do really hard jobs because the money feeds their family, right? We are in fortunate enough positions where we get to go and talk about growth and all of this stuff, right? Sometimes a job is absolutely just a job, but I would dare say that even in the person in whatever the worst job in America is, they'd like every once in a while for their boss to say, hey, you're really good at that. It's just a human instinct to want to be recognized for like your ability to contribute to the group. And I think what AJ does, and what Scott Harris and Jeff Greenberg afford him the leeway to do, is use roster spots on really specific skill sets. But that means that every player comes to the ballpark and knows exactly how they can be part of the team. So when you deconstruct something like last season, you can pick out a moment for literally every player. And a moment in the future, if that series ends up going the way the Tigers want and they end up in the ALCS, you can pick out a moment in the future where AJ Hinch would say, your turn. We could right now write out a lineup card and draw out a moment for any guy who you would think would be the 29th guy. because everybody knows what their value is. And we only get to live life once. So we might as well have value every day that we're walking on this silly planet of ours. And I think that's where the magic comes in, right? It strategically is very smart to pinch hit for a lefty versus a lefty. And I've been talking about Kerry Carpenter because he's an easy piece of evidence to grab. But like anybody for anybody, you end up with the idea that you are actually part of this. You're not just calcifying at the end of the bench. You're not just like utility player X who, because it's Sunday and, you know, Garrett Cole's on the mound, like you're playing, good luck, you're 0 for 4. I don't think AJ, you know, just reading between the lines of some of his stories from spring trainings in the past and not making teams, he didn't make enough teams where I'm sure he felt like he was skilled enough to be a part of it for varying reasons. They had a veteran, they had somebody on a contract, whatever it might be, that I just think he understands now that baseball sometimes discards people. And if you don't discard people, you can get a lot out of them and they will absolutely be loyal and dedicated to that craft because you have found the thing that they're really good at. It's not hard, but nobody does it. There's so many, you travel around baseball enough and you're going to hear a manager go, he stinks. Well, like what? But he's good at something. He's got to be good at something. He's on your roster. Like find the spot. Maybe he hits righty knuckleballs. I don't know. Like find him a chance to do that.
All right, Jason, we have, discussed the optimization of the bottom of the roster. Let's talk about the top of the roster. Talk to us about the best pitcher in baseball, Tarik Skubal. How fun was that to watch every start last year? And what do you think? How do you build on that going into this year? Because the expectations are going to be totally different. You won the Cy Young Award. You're the best pitcher in baseball. And you have to pretty much dominate every time you walk out there.
Well, the good news is his personality is such that I think he makes that happen for himself anyway. Like I do think that one of the best moments last year, and I haven't asked him specifically about this, sometimes it's just a little more fun to read between the lines, but that start right before the All-Star break, when he mowed down Ellie De La Cruz and he screamed so loudly, there had to have been a little bit of like, hey, that's your superhero? I'm one too. Like nothing against Ellie De La Cruz, I don't think, but like, oh, everybody's talking about him? Yep, strike 3. Hope you enjoyed the fastball. Like, I think there's part of that in Tarik Skubal. And he is super competitive with himself, but he also, like, I love when guys recognize who they're facing. I love when it's like, there's a wide receiver, back in the day, it'd be like Jalen Ramsey or Darrelle Revis or Deion Sanders, like pick a corner. But I love when guys would be like, yeah, bring it on. Like, follow me all game. I think that's what we want to see as viewers. And that's why people are competitive. Like we want to see somebody inviting that level of hero versus hero. And so I think Tarik Skubal is 100% honest if he says, I don't care about expectations. Like, I don't. My expectations are mine for me, and I'm going to go out and dominate because I'm going to go out and dominate. And I think that's the joy of watching him. I do think there's some of that Michael Jordan Last Dance DNA in there. There's some of that, like, I'm going to get more mad at myself than anybody will ever get at me, or I will get at anybody else, even including Rolex buddy Jake Rogers. Like, I do think Tarik Skubal is a machine. And that, that's not to say there aren't pitfalls. That's not to say there aren't adjustments. Like, obviously, Kansas City had some success against him last year. So there's like one demon there, to not in the way that it's haunting him, but a pitfall landmine that he has to deal with next year. But he is such a joy to watch because he's what everybody wants out of themselves. Like you hope to be able to go out into the world and have that much control, no matter what you believe in a higher power. Like you just want to have that much control of your surroundings. That's why he's a joy to watch for me.
Another guy at the top of the roster, Riley Green. Do you think he can get MVP votes this season? That's something I'm watching for because it seems like he's on that trajectory when you look at decreasing the ground balls, increasing the fly balls, getting it to the pull side, drawing more walks. Like maybe you cut down on the whiffs a little bit more and you can jump from great to elite. Do you think this is the year that Riley Green goes from, hey, this guy's an all-star to this guy could be a superstar?
I do. And I said it on the first spring training telecast. I just think he navigates so quietly through a Major League Baseball season that he doesn't get noticed. And I do think the Tigers doing what they did allows for that to happen more this year. I think we're going to see the benefits of last year's run a little more this year, because if the Tigers do win 3 or 4 in a row, we all know how this works. Nationally, it's going to be, here come the Tigers again. And then it's, here's the story of what they did last year, and it all kind of redoubles. And I had Steven Strasburg in AAA, I may have mentioned previously, but the one thing that I took from Steven more than anything when he was sort of a magnet there for attention is that once you have that attention, it never really goes away for you or your teammates as long as you sustain it somewhat. So I do think Riley is going to get more attention this year just inherently. And then I also, you talked about the whiff rate, and I think that's something obviously he was working on last year early with swing decisions, very well documented. But I do think when the offense struggles, the big names try to become RBI people. Not that RBI as a stat is like the most important thing. I don't think it's nothing either. But I do think that when you're scoring a run or 2 runs or 3 runs, like, I do think there's some added, I need to drive in a run. I need to do something here. And I would bet that just because of that happening less, hopefully, right? If the offense is good and the people around him are good and they're doing damage, I would bet that alleviates some of the chase from him and some of the swing and miss as well. And he can be even more patient with the way people pitch him. And I also do think like he'll get better pitches if the people around him are producing more as well.
You mentioned Steven Strasburg. How about Jackson Jobe? I mean, this is a guy who, rookie of the year, front runner, he's already being labeled as that. Is that kind of the expectation for this guy, considering the stuff that he has, the athleticism that he has, drawing back on your experience with Strasburg? Like, what are the expectations for Jobe now as he's coming into a situation where he's not pitching out of the bullpen in September or in October? He's going to be relied on as a starter and a guy that can, pitch deep into games at times and have really good stuff and lead the Tigers to a win. Just what are some of your thoughts there?
Yeah, Steven was like a 7-act play, and it was part tragedy and part triumph. And there was so much in between. There was injury and there was frustration with the team, but there was also, self-made success and ace stuff and just galvanizing an entire nation's capital and everything that came along with it. I will say maybe the gift that gives the most from that call you played earlier is that I can just decline to talk about expectations because the Tigers bucked the odds in my first season and I said it. So I'm that guy anyway, preseason, who's like, well, let's see what happens to our trusty sidekick. That's the part of the season that gets me most excited. So I tend to not get too wrapped up in what we think is going to happen, which makes me a really bad question answerer on a podcast about expectations. But what I'm most interested to see is how Jackson Jobe does the long haul this year, because we'll all be invited into the ups and downs of it. And then you come out of that tunnel and what you end up with in the biggest moments, as we know, is what matters most. But I just think he's so well equipped. I think he's got self-belief, but it also comes from a foundation of just being really good at this and really understanding pitch design and what he can do to hitters. And I do think he's just at the beginning of the tinkering process that, as we know, has had great success with the Tigers and pitchers in the past. So I'm more like, okay, deal the cards and let's see what everybody at the table has and what comes on the flop. and then we'll go from there. But what I'm most excited to watch is his reaction to the first run of tough starts and who comes to his aid, how they come to his aid, all of those sorts of things to make him a long-term success. And then I start talking like Scott Harris, right? And I just heard myself do it because it's like you are trying to plot for the future while you're plotting for today. And so I'm watching for the now because all he can be is this year in life, this year, right? But I'm also watching for those signs that he is going to figure it out in the future. But again, as baseball fans, I didn't know Colt Keith was going to dig himself out when he dug himself out. Like it felt like AAA was a possible destination when he was at the bottom of it, but he figured it out. And so the best moments for me are those turning points in a season where you think you saw, but you don't know for another month. So that I know that's a little bit vague, but like that's where my eyes are as this season moves forward with him specifically.
You know, Ev and I have talked about this, and we actually talked to Job on the pod. And what I'm fascinated by is not just how dynamic when you watch him now. I mean, my joke the other day or last weekend was I was literally bowing to the television after the first two innings of his, not the start yesterday, but the prior to start. It was just awe-inspiring to watch. But what I'm really interested to see is where are we in May, in the middle to the end of May, 7-8 starts deep. Maybe he's had a couple good, great ones, but he's had a couple that were a little rockier. People putting the ball in play when you didn't expect it. And the progression and the adjustment and the polish he adds to sequencing, to paying the price for mistakes, how he learns when he can bully hitters and when he can't. And I figure 7-8 starts, he's going to experience all these things. It's kind of like yesterday when he faced Vlad and he was finally mad about it. And he just threw 2 FU fastballs at the top of the zone and said, hit it. So, these are the lessons that are going to be fascinating to watch with Jackson Jobe, just as you described. That's what's really interesting to us, and I can't wait to see it.
And there's depth, right? And there's pitching depth, they feel like. We said that in spring training last year, so I'm a little hesitant, right? Because you don't know. You have it until you don't have it, right? But there are obviously choices. I think the Tigers, it was really smart when I saw the email across my screen yesterday, like the Jose Urquidy thing. That is like, that's not really a risk. Like 1 year, $1 million, and then the option for next year, like, okay, like, let's see what we have here. And I feel like with Alex Cobb at some point coming back, and it looks like Casey Mize throwing it pretty well in spring training. I'm at the point, it is March 9th as we're taping this. Can we please just roll the ball out? Like, I'm just like, because you think we're looking for all these signs, and then how often do we talk about spring training once the season starts? We never talk about spring training, and I'm sorry. Like, please watch on March the 12th and March the 17th and March the 21st when Dan's in. Like, please watch our spring training telecasts. We're gonna have a good time, and we're gonna look for those signs. But like, I don't know. Like, let's just play. And especially so this year because it's the Dodgers on day one. Like, let's go play the Dodgers. Let's see where this is. Let's figure it out where it is right out of spring training. Like, let's have Skubal versus Yamamoto. Let's have fun with it and let's play. That's where I am right now. And I haven't even been down there that much. You've been there forever. And like, at some point, spring training is like, let's move on.
All right, Jason, that's all we have for you, but thanks for joining the Days of Our podcast. We are honored to be the first Tigers podcast that earned a second appearance from you, so I guess that means you don't hate me, or at least you like me just enough to come on the podcast a second time. So that's a win for me today. I'll take that one. But let's do this again sometime in the future, man. It's been a blast.
I feel like yearly in early March we're aiming towards. So no, this is great work. Thank you guys.
Put it on your calendar, all right? March 2026, we'll get you back.
Can I just say, people send me like calendar invites for meetings, and I am so far away from actual workplace strategy. I have no idea how that stuff works. Like calendar invite, just like text me that I have to be on the Zoom. I would be really bad in a real job. I promise you that.
Awesome. Hey, well, thanks for coming on, man. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.